Hi to anyone who is out there listening. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kate Brodock, and I'm the Executive Director of Digital and Social Media at Syracuse University. I have with me today Phil Gomes, who I'm going to introduce in just a second. We are going to discuss today some of the ins and outs of Wikipedia. And part of the reason that I asked Phil to come on was that there had been some frustration, especially in the higher ed space, from the community managers, communications managers, and PR managers, etc., of really trying to navigate Wikipedia, hopping on Wikipedia, trying to update organizational web pages, dealing with the editors, that sort of thing. And this has certainly been an issue in the greater PR world. Especially the ethics involved on both sides, on both Wikipedia's side and as on the user side, especially when we're talking about being representatives of the organizations in question, and how to kind of, grapple with wanting your organizational Wikipedia site to be accurate, but then sometimes being bucketed into a category of, are we embellishing things? Are they accurate? That sort of thing. Being a representative of our organization. So hopefully today, now this is an area that Phil himself has been very proactive in, the ethics involved in and around Wikipedia. So hopefully by the end of the conversation, we'll be able to hear a little bit more about that general discussion and also what's being done, what's coming in the future, and how we can all best grapple with all of this Wikipedia stuff. So I am pleased to introduce Phil Gomes, and he is Senior VP at Edelman, Senior VP of Digital Integration. And I'm going to kick it over to Phil right now, and he can tell us a little bit more about what he does, how he got to Edelman, and then we'll go from there. Phil?
Great. Kate, pleasure to be here. You can hear me all right, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we had some audio problems a little bit earlier, but I'm glad to see we fixed them. So it's great to be here. This is certainly one of my favorite topics. And as Kate said, I'm Senior Vice President of Digital Integration here at Edelman. What does that mean? All that means is that I help put digitalness into the things that not only we do as a firm, but what our clients do as well. So not so much thinking about social media and online community engagement as a specific silo of activities, but essentially looking at how it all sort of melts into whatever a communications department is currently doing. So I came here to Edelman in 2005. I was actually its first, I hesitate to use the term social media hire, but essentially what my role has morphed into, if I look at the through line that goes through all of my roles here, it's essentially, being, I like to say I serve my client, but I stand for the community, right? And so I like to make sure that that whatever a company is doing is, form, fit, and function compatible with a given online community's goals. At the same time, recognizing the fact that companies want to be participants in these communities on like an even playing field, just as much as perhaps you might consider they would hire a PR firm to perhaps influence those communities in some way. And so that's taken a lot of twists and turns over time, and what eventually happened was early this year, in fact just after the new year, in sort of a peak of frustration, given all the emails that go through my inbox and the calls that hit my desktop, there was a lot of anxiety around Wikipedia, and the more I read about it and the more I talked to colleagues both within the Edelman network and then outside of it, there seemed to be what I felt to be a fundamental misunderstanding. And I looked at some of these Wikipedia engagements, and it seemed to me that there was a lot of inaccuracy that was allowed to persist online, and representatives from organizations, for various reasons, uh, very often they came into this seeking an article that was accurate or balanced, and basically um, I felt not given the proper forum. Now, granted, if there's one industry that is completely horrible at its own PR, it's the PR industry. We're very often content to have the likes of the likes of Hollywood dictate what PR is supposed to be, thanks to "Thank You for Smoking," or you can even go as far back as Tony Curtis and "The Sweet Smell of Success." Hardly a flattering portrait. But what I recognized was that, and in talking with again several colleagues, was the fact that there tended to be the attitude that, hey, if something's inaccurate, go to the talk page. And I was seeing talk page requests go ignored for a very long period of time, and that the rules with regard to Wikipedia are, when they aren't labyrinthine, they tend to be contradictory. And it seemed to me that there was a lot of disagreement as to what value a corporate communications person operating within the bounds of the Wikipedia community rules and guidelines, what value that person could actually offer. Because at the end of the day, the mission is compatible, where the most a company could reasonably hope for is an accurate entry, and presumably that's what the Wikipedia community is looking for as well. And so when you get past the activities of some bad actors who have actively sought to whitewash Wikipedia, you get to the fact that, again, people will essentially want the same thing. And accuracy, that's something that a corporate communication person can most certainly live with and consider a home run. So about a day later, a longtime correspondent of mine, Mr. John Cass, came up with the idea of creating some kind of Facebook group. And so I kind of took that idea and ran with it, and thus CREW was developed, Corporate Representatives for Ethical Wikipedia Engagement, because all the other acronyms were taken, I swear to God. And right now we're above 350 members, mostly from the corporate communications area, both agency and in-house. I will say that agencies aren't too terribly well represented, but it's a pretty good chunk. Mostly corporate communicators, a number of students, so a lot of professors are doing a pretty good job of integrating Wikipedia in the classroom as a means to not only teach research but also teach community engagement, which I think is a very good goal. And most importantly, we've managed to attract several longtime Wikipedia volunteers who either see the value of teaching PR people how to do it the right way, or are there to sort of make sure that the PR folk don't take the discussion completely off the rails, right? So yeah, we're up to about 350 some odd members. It's been a very rewarding conversation, I think. I think it's the first sustained, constructive discussion about how corporate communicators and Wikipedians can and should interact. I think that quite a bit of value is developed not only in terms of drawing attention to the issue, but so our first version of a flowchart to guide communicators in Wikipedia engagement went live in April, and we are now ridiculously overdue in putting out the second version of it. So excuse me, if you go to the CREW Facebook page, just search for CREW with an E at the end, you'll find a link to the second version of this, which you can all contribute to. It's hosted on creately.com, which is a flowchart collaboration tool and service. And I think that flowchart was of great value. I should also point out some of the research that was done by Mr. Robert Lawton, one of our volunteer Wikipedians, who did some research in terms of Um, a Wikipedia page is Google juice. Now, we all intuitively know that Wikipedia shows up in the first, 1 to 3 results for the search of any company or brand. He actually poured that through the Fortune 100, poured it through Google, poured it through Bing, and 88% of the Fortune 100 show up on the top 5 results in Google, and I think north of 90% in Bing. So obviously, there's a lot of interest and anxiety,
Oh
I
yeah.
think, around this particular topic, and I think that learning how to work with the Wikipedia community, I think, is a good is a good way for any communicator to generally learn how to adapt to and interact with the community and bring a client there in a way that it's a win-win for everyone.
Great. So this, I wanted to get a little bit more into, you've talked through a lot of your reasonings for wanting to sort of set up this group, etc. Now, it sounds to me like this is a somewhat, I don't quite want to say informal group, but it's sort of there isn't necessarily going to be a big change from Wikipedia unless they would like to sort of come together and work on this.
Right. I mean, we got that's a very good point. I mean, we kind of got a reputation for being a group that was actively lobbying Wikipedia to change its ways, and I think there's some reasonable. I think that expectation wasn't unreasonable to come to. If you go back to my original post, I said maybe it might make sense to have a derelict entry clause, that if an entry is derelict for a certain amount of time, then maybe perhaps the corporate communicator should be granted more leeway, and that didn't go over well, for various reasons that I now understand. So, to represent Crew's mission based on the first 5 or 6 days of social media activity or chatter, there are some folks out there who I will say have tried to sort of deliberately misrepresent what we're trying to do. But since then, what it's come down to is, I think the best win-win for all involved is to make sure that PR folks know how to do it the right way. So we've had situations like, for example, Jake Ocassi, who is one of our participants in Crew. He lives out in near Philadelphia, and he actually showed up to the Philadelphia PRSA chapter and gave a talk on that particular topic. And it was very, very well received, and I'd love for him to do it again. He's also started a project on Wikipedia called COI Plus, right? COI stands for conflict of interest. Again, I think he and other folks that aren't necessarily in the PR field but are longtime Wikipedia contributors have seen the value of what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to do is, again, get PR folk to understand how to do it the right way, and that the quick easy fix is probably not the right one. And as a matter of fact, if one goes for the quick easy fix, it's very easily reversed, and you're sort of back to where you started. So, but in any event, I do think that again, if we keep sort of the eye on the prize, that everybody wants the same thing, an accurate entry, I think that I think that all parties most certainly benefit.
Yeah, and so one of the big things, again, that has been sort of chatted about is this idea of the relationship with the editors. And we can see in the past year certainly why some of the editors would be very wary. I mean, with Bell Pottinger, who, the PR firm from UK, who was kind of blatantly going in and changing their clients' addresses. They themselves got lambasted by the PR community, which was good. But you could certainly relate to some of the editors' feelings on this. How what have been some of the advances? Because so far what I'm hearing from sort of the regular users is that that is part of the hang up, is that they automatically go into this community and they feel their intentions are, as you say with most PR reps, their intentions are to simply get accurate information in there. And they kind of reach this wall because it's very difficult also to have a constructive relationship with the editors. What are some of the things that you've found in the past since you've really kind of gotten into this, and especially since developing this group? Have you found that to be improving? Are the editors kind of coming to the table and wanting to work with communications managers? How does that whole landscape look to you?
Well, I think there are a number of really good points, sort of embedded in that. I mean, I think that certainly the ones that I'm most aware of are the ones that I've interacted with either through Wikipedia Signpost, which is their newsletter, or through Crew and that sort of thing. And I think that they do. I think absolutely, based on public relations past behavior, they have every right to be wary, I think, but I very much doubt that Wikipedians as a community would want to be judged by the most extreme of their members, right? And so obviously there are some groups and people and individuals and fiefdoms and that sort of thing that I think no one's ever going to make happy. And I think we anticipate that, but I do get the sense, I do very much get the sense that, while before I think that anybody who is anybody who thought that we had a point was kind of poked in the ribs and smacked around a little bit. But I think as the topic wore on and people discussed it a bit more and more thoughtfully, I think good things are starting to happen. And Evelyn Rodriguez, I don't know if you read her blog, but she wrote something very, very cool several years ago where she said that volcanic soil is the most fertile soil in the world, but nothing will grow in it while it's still smoking. And that I think that phase was sort of the early part of the year, and it wasn't until April that the tourists started to go home, right? I think when Crew launched, people projected onto it every frustration they ever had about Wikipedia or PR, and then once those tourists went home, probably around April or May of this year, that's when the conversation started to become definitive, and people were really starting to see what each can bring to the table. I don't think, and I think it's naive to think that we can overcome, potentially decades of some combination of mistrust and half-truths about what the PR profession actually is. But what I think we can do is by offering thoughtful policy ideas, by encouraging right behavior, by pointing out when it happens, I think that would be really good. I also want to bring up one more point. You brought up one firm that was beaten over the coals, and it's a very familiar story in the press, right? Where company or agency is doing bad by Wikipedia, they get smacked around online. A mainstream press, which absolutely relies on the online world for leads, just sort of says, without really a lot of context, oh my God, this company was editing its Wikipedia entry, how awful, how horrible. And the response that, in discussing this with a couple of Wikipedians, a lot of the thought is that this public shaming approach is, one thing a publicist or a PR person understands is bad press. So if we give them bad press, they'll go away. And for a very long time, that's been the only arrow in the quiver in terms of dealing with PR people, is let's humiliate them, and recognize that the press isn't really going to catch any kind of nuance as to whether or not that corporate representative brought mutual objective value to that entry, right? And one of my arguments that I made is that, and this was in the article I did in Signpost, or the electronic interview that I did, was that that method had sort of reached the end of its useful life, and clearly it's not a deterrent. So the best thing that both parties can possibly do is try to figure out a way to cooperate. And so that kind of gets to the core of what we think we can accomplish, and how we think we can contribute to the health of the encyclopedia.
Great. So that was really, I think, useful, definitely background and kind of theoretical, what's going on in the industry, etc. I'd love to chat a little bit more about kind of, here I'm a PR pro, and I would actually like to go into Wikipedia and be somewhat constructive in this space. Can we talk a little bit about some of the things that you've either at a little bit more of an application level that
Sure.
you've seen change, maybe some tips for people, or there are these really key set of things that you as a PR pro can be thinking about when you're going into Wikipedia or trying to communicate with the editors and that sort of thing? Sure.
So some of this is going to get a little bit in the weeds. So if I go into spastic acronym mode, I apologize. So a couple of things. Where to start? Well, I think a corporate representative or a university representative, I think the number one thing they ought to do is get an account on Wikipedia and fill out their user page. Introduce yourself, talk about who you are, talk about your interests in being there, talk a little bit about what your potential conflicts of interest are, just so people get to know you and people can kind of see what you're all about. And you'll find that that's a place that you're going to want to pay attention to quite a bit, because many Wikipedians will choose to interact with you in the talk page of that entry, your user page. From there, then I would try to get a sense for how people arrive at consensus on Wikipedia. And so I would go to the talk pages of not only the entry you're interested in, but other entries as well, preferably entries in which maybe you have some level of expertise. Like, for example, one of the things that I'm working on with my father-in-law right now is I happen to be a fan of Brazilian cachaça, which is their local fire water down in Brazil. And my father-in-law and I are working on, well, what would we want to see in Wikipedia with regard to cachaça? Of course, he's writing it in Portuguese, and I'm stumbling through a translation, but we're kind of working on what that might look like. So it's something I know a lot about, I'm passionate about, and I look at that as kind of a microcosm. And then it's also helpful to look at some of the notice boards. Like, the most interesting one for a PR person exploring Wikipedia, the most interesting notice board, I think, would be the conflict of interest notice board, or the COI notice board. So if you just Google COI notice board, you'll find it. And these are people raising red flags, saying, hey, I think this entry needs to be changed, and I'm not getting a lot of joy on the talk page of the entry. So this is where I want to have a discussion about this topic. And you find some very interesting conversations there. Now, in terms of your own entry, it is always appropriate to interact on the talk page of that particular entry. Depending on the nature of your organization, I've seen I've seen Wikipedia entries of Fortune 100 companies. I've seen them go ignored for months, talk page entreaties. I've seen very rich discussions for very obscure companies where a response has been had within 24 hours. You just never know. And one of the main rules of Wikipedia is there is no deadline. So you kind of have to set expectations not only with yourself but with your boss. Is that you're working with a community that is very passionate about what they do. They're trying as hard as they can. Sometimes they feel somewhat overwhelmed, but the best thing that you can do is show how you're bringing value to the encyclopedia. So in terms of an escalation process, I would first start with the talk page. If you don't get any joy there, I would go to the notice board and see if somebody will sort of pick up that cause. And if not there, sort of as a last resort, you can use their ticketing system. They call it called OTRS. You email info@wikipedia.org, and that's also staffed with volunteers. It wouldn't be the first place I would go. I would want to demonstrate to that group that you've made a good faith effort to interact with the community, but that's also available too. And sometimes they might, have a route or an idea that that maybe you hadn't heard of before. Now, the final point, and it's an important one, and this has been a matter of debate in terms of its effect on Wikipedia participation, is this notion of the fact that the wiki code, the code that you use to format a document on Wikipedia, is kind of arcane and weird looking. And some people say that that actually discourages them. Now, the good news is you can hit preview on your talk page entry before you publish it, but and they try to make it as WYSIWYG as possible, and they keep on talking about the fact that there is going to be a true WYSIWYG editor coming up at some point. But it is one thing to consider that you're going to have to spend some kind of investment, not only looking at how the community operates, but getting some facility in terms of the tools that they use.
Great. So one of the things I'm really hearing strongly from you is that going into Wikipedia with much more of a community mentality yourself is actually quite helpful, because you really are working inside. It's not just I have a page, it needs to be updated, I would like to go in, update, and come out.
Fix
it is
this
much
for me, yeah.
Yeah, and that understandably so could also probably turn off some of the editors. This is their community, and that's how I think Wikipedia has always communicated about itself, as this is not just an online encyclopedia. It really is community sustained. So going in and really spending some time learning how the system works sounds like that's also very important.
Well, isn't it true of all PR practice, right? So, isn't it a PR person's job to know how, and doesn't a client or a company rely on its PR person to know how the New York Times works, or what gets something that 4-minute spot on the evening news, or or what kind of story flies in a trade magazine rather than a business magazine, right? I mean, and knowing that mechanics, and knowing that the fact that the mechanics are very different from Wikipedia and the New York Times, but I think what unites it is the PR person's duty and requirement to understand how both work at a very fundamental level. And so that's where sometimes the PR hangups around Wikipedia are kind of amusing, because now at some point they kind of, many PR people grow frustrated at the fact that they have to learn something new, and that's essentially what's happening, is that they really do have to learn how something else works and operates. I think a final point, to your previous question, now that it hits me, sometimes some organizations will have their entry will be in absolute failed state status. right? So, to your earlier point where you can understand how a volunteer especially, can be frustrated when somebody is saying, do this for me, do this for me, do this for me, do this for me. You know, I find that for anybody, Wikipedia or otherwise, in an attention-starved environment, it's easier for somebody to ask somebody to react to something rather than expecting them to do something for you, right? So when an article is perhaps in a complete failed state status, one of the things you might consider is, every user page has what's called a sandbox. And the user sandbox is where somebody can maybe start drafting either a proposed new entry or another proposed take on a current entry. So what I would recommend in those cases is that if you're, the University of, dismal Seepage, Wyoming, and you have a university page that is old or inaccurate, and you just get the feeling that you would really just henpeck the hell out of somebody if you pointed out all the different problems that are in it, I would recommend take the source material, move it over to your sandbox, and while respecting the efforts of the people who came before, provide your own take on it. And what's also helpful is that on Wikipedia there are a number of writer's guides and quality guides that you can reference to say, okay, is my entry truly of encyclopedic quality? And then at that point, you could invite people, maybe via the COI notice board or the talk page on your university entry, invite them over and say, hey, I don't think that this entry is much better than stub class, but if you want to see my take on an entry that I think might be better, why don't you come over here and react to this, and then maybe start from here, right? And I think that's another way to go. Again, if you feel like the current entry is in absolutely such a state that you'd be committing, death by digital paper cut, right?
So one piece of this, and I have a specific question in from somebody, and I will kind of wrap this into a little bit of a larger thing. One of the big things also is on the reverse, okay, PR firms can do bad on Wikipedia. We get that side of it. Now, on the Wikipedia side of things, the editors have actually been criticized for also maybe having such a fiefdom, if you will, and putting such hurdles around, making entries accurate and changing things and that sort of thing. The kind of real ownership, inhibiting ownership of the community. So one specific question we got in, for instance, which has to do with this topic, is, well, okay, I feel like I have tried with the editors to, explain where I'm coming from, point out the changes, the proposed changes, try to, to the best of my capability, have it categorized as fact. That's important. What can you kind of say to this whole topic of, here now, okay, we as PR pros are trying to do our very best. How does the other side of that work?
Well, I mean, that's a really good point, because again, you're talking about volunteers here, and that changes a lot of the dynamic that PR folk are used to dealing with, because we've been sort of, if we felt, for example, that a reporter at a newspaper was treating us unfairly somehow, or hounding us, or spending inappropriate amounts of time in the dumpster, things like that, there was always an escalation process, right? You go to the associate editor, the managing editor, editor-in-chief, publisher, and now we're finding that perhaps that's we're dealing with a situation where that's not the case. Well, then you've got to sort of change the mindset there, in that to this person, if you go through the checklist that I just sort of rattled off earlier in this hangout, one of the things to think about, I think, is, you know, to what degree has that person really engaged with that community, right? And so it used to be in the past where I think it was like, you don't like your entry? Well, go to the talk page and you'll get it fixed there. And I think we've disabused a lot of people of the naive notion that people pay attention to it. So, but as I described earlier, there are other ways that you can just sort of escalate that. And, you know, as long as it's positioned in, number one, with reliable sources online, verifiable sources online, as long as there's a demonstration of a good faith effort to do right by the community, then I say, you know, go through that process, and then even, you know, up to, like I said, info@wikipedia.org, where you know, somebody might say, well, you know, actually, I think the best way to handle it is this, and you might find that that is different for everybody, because like I said, the rules around Wikipedia, they can be labyrinthine, they can sometimes be even contradictory, so it requires, you know, some degree of patience, but also an understanding that of what you're dealing with, and what you are dealing with are volunteers who are very sensitive, increasingly so, at the notion that there's this horde of PR people that are prepared to like crash the gates or something, and you know, just being sensitive to those particular issues.
Great, and I wanted to kind of wrap in. I've managed to work in a couple people's questions here, and I wanted to wrap up with a, you know, oh, this is all incredibly helpful information. You know, if I were to sit back, you know, I might almost say, my gosh, this feels like a lot of work. And we as PR pros, of course, we have work associated with our job. Some people will, you know, have sort of deprioritized their Wikipedia page because of this. It's a lot. Some things are just a lot easier to deal with. You know, everybody's plate full, etc. Yeah. What would you say in your entire, you know, you've got all of your daily stuff, all of your communications initiatives, etc. Where would you place this process of working in the Wikipedia system, etc.? I know you clearly mentioned some of the very important search results that were there, but I'd love to just hear from you how people should be thinking about their Wikipedia pages and really working on this issue within the context of their entire daily, monthly, yearly job.
Sure. I would look at it in sort of the same rubric as generally online reputation management. So a lot of people ask, what's our Wikipedia strategy? It's like, no, the question to ask is what's our online reputation strategy? And how does Wikipedia necessarily figure into that? Is it, you know, is the Wikipedia entry a problem? Is it false? Demonstrably so? Is there are there problems with what they call undue weight, right? So is, you know, 70% of the text having to do with one tiny little event that happened in the company's history? All those questions need to be discussed, but yeah, it should be within the holistic view of how are we managing our company's reputation online? Are we at all? Right? And, you know, sometimes that's the role of the specialist in an organization. Sometimes it's just kind of the role of everybody. You know, there are pros and cons to each approach, I think. But I would say that, you know, frankly, like, for example, I have one client who, well, I have more than one client, but one client in particular, their CEO has an iPad. That iPad has one app on it that he downloaded. It's the Wikipedia app. And every morning that CEO, he will wake up, he will fire up his iPad, he will check the entry for his company, and if he doesn't like what he sees, the communications department's going to have a pretty bad day that day.
Very interesting.
right?
Very interesting.
So think about online reputation also in terms of what the boss is thinking of, right? And, thanks to the iPad, I think, I always joke that it's like your rear view mirror on your car where it says objects and mirror might be closer than they appear. I think sometimes that's very much the same where, now that we've got sort of the consumerization of IT, again, that CEO with the iPad, he can look at that and his entire world is that company, and he has his entire world in a window, and that window is on that iPad, and he fires it up, and he sees something he doesn't like. He's going to look for some kind of solution, or at least some kind of plan in place to manage that, because you better believe that the C-suite is critically concerned with the reputation of the firm. So,
absolutely, and I think it's also important to continue to consider, really that search aspect of it is quite important, because you have many demographics who are going to be accessing whatever information they want to about you through search. Right. And some people think differently about Wikipedia. Others think that it might be the first place they go to your point. So right. Anything, from a higher ed standpoint, you've got anything from trustees. And let me tell you, if a trustee wakes up and goes and takes a look at the Wikipedia page and it's not good, that's going to be a serious right. all hands on deck situation. So that's also really in that context of how strong it is in terms of search. It's also then follows that, okay, well, yes, we've got the suite, we've got YouTube, Google, Wikipedia, all in those top search results. Who's going to go where in right. there for their information? So that's really important. Well, listen, Phil, we kind of covered everything and some of the main issues that people were having. I don't know if you have any just kind of final thoughts on this. Final takeaways, big picture, do this tomorrow or whatever.
Well, I mean, the main thing I'll say is that anybody in this position is going to have a lot of pressures on them. And like I said at the beginning of this hangout, I stand for my company, I stand for its clients, or I serve the company and I serve its clients, but I stand for the community, right? And you may find that it's kind of interesting. Some of the worst PR people that I've ever run into were ones that were more advocates for the media than they were their clients. But what I find now is that companies very much want to say, "Oh, just get it done, get it done, get it done, get it done." And I think that if somebody's in an organization that isn't strong enough to stand up to those pressures and say, "But yeah, if we take that quick, easy route, we're going to completely destroy our relationship with this community," and somebody, it's incumbent upon that communicator to bring in that long-term vision, right? To be able to say, we're better off trying to see where the win-win needs of our organization and this community intersect, and start from there and work backwards, right? And
well, that's like such the perfect wrap up. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, listen, thank you very much. We're gonna wrap this up, and it will be this whole thing has been recorded. And so we'll make it available, and we'll be making it available on our SU site and a couple of other things. And Phil, I'll send this over to you as well. You could feel very free to use it yourself and get it out there. And thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.